Good morning.
Good morning.
What are you afraid of? Think about that for a minute. What do you fear? I don't like heights. You know, when I get on a ladder, when I get close to that third step from the top, that's it for me. I worked with a guy one time that could stand on the very, the one that says not a step? He would stand on that with like a 50-pound chain fall on his shoulder and reach up over his head and attach it to the ceiling on a hook. And not, the ladder would never wiggle or nothing. And me, I get to that third step from the top and the ladder's like this. Yesterday we were taking down Christmas lights and we got this aluminum ladder. I'm hoping one day I can accidentally run over it with the truck. Because that thing, when I get up to halfway, it's wiggling and all kinds of stuff, and oh no, heights is for me. But fear is something that we all have, and it's different things for different people. And we can conquer fear. We may not think that we can, but we can. And so we have to understand what fear is, first of all. We have to understand that. So one thing is that just the definition, okay? So if you look it up, an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. Okay? So someone or something. But here's the thing. Do you fear loneliness? That's something that a lot of people are afraid of, is being alone. How about the dark? A lot of kids are afraid of the dark. Here's a big one. Do you fear death? A lot of people, most people, are afraid of dying. So here's some things that I researched and looked up, and all these make sense to me. So here's some points about fear that we can help us to understand fear better. So first of all, fear is a normal brain function and is healthy. We don't look at it that way. But fear, God put fear there as part of our emotions so that we are alerted to things that might harm us. Whether it be a person or a situation or event, whatever it has to be. But that fear is a normal, healthy response. Okay? The other thing is that fear comes at a lot of different levels. And that can range from simple anxiety, okay, just being nervous about something, all the way to sheer terror, where you are just paralyzed. You can't speak, you can't move, you're in terror of whatever it is that's in front of you. Now, fear is not as automatic as we think. It's in part instinct, part learned, and part taught. Okay, some fears are instinctive. All right, pain, for example, causes fear instinctively because of its implications for survival. Okay, loud noises. A great example. Sharon and I went to have dinner last night at the Japanese. What do you call that thing? Where they cook. Yeah, where they cook on the table. And so, the guy, one of the things that he does when he comes out is that he squirts, I don't know, oil or something on it, and he lights it on fire. And it's like, this big flame comes up. Well, there was these two little kids sitting across the table from us. And the youngest little boy, when he lit that thing, he was gone. He took off. He was gone. And then there was a little baby, maybe 20 minutes later at another table, and Sharon's like, let's watch him and see what he did. I mean, he's a little bitty fella, And when he lit that thing, he's like, woo! Man, his arms went up. He was, it just cracked us up. But that is a normal, healthy response, okay? So other fears are learned. We learn to be afraid of certain people, places, situations because of negative associations and past experiences. You know, for instance, a near drowning incident, for example, may cause fear each time you get close to a body of water. Okay? And I think a lot of us, not everybody, but a lot of us have fears like that, where it's maybe something as a child that we experienced, and that's just a trigger for us. You know, that when we're around that situation or an animal, you know, spiders, snakes, you know, whatever, you know. And I mean, that's a great example. You know, some people are deathly afraid of spiders, but don't have a problem with snakes. Or they would have a pet snake, but are deathly afraid of spiders. So personally, I don't want any of those in the house. It's a bad situation. So other fears are taught. You know, cultural norms often dictate whether someone should be feared or not. Okay? Think, for example, about how certain social groups are feared and persecuted because of a socially created impression that they are dangerous. Okay? So, you know, you see somebody walk in, you know, that's, you know, got a hoodie on, they're not showing their face, dark sunglasses, your antenna goes up, so to speak. Right? You know, certain group like bikers, for instance. You know, not all bikers are criminals. Okay? Just because they wear a leather jacket, you know, and all that kind of stuff, and ride a Harley, doesn't make them a criminal. Okay? But some people like that. You know, the people that ride Harleys, okay? And if you're out there and you ride a Harley, don't take it personal, right? But that's kind of the culture, right? Leather jacket, leather pants, you know, the bandana, all that kind of stuff. You know, maybe you can get some tattoos or whatever, you know. But you know, that's part of the culture of that. And some people fear that. Just because they hear a Harley with loud pipes and a guy with a leather jacket on, it could be a dentist. You know, it could be a dentist. Who knows? But they fear that. You don't need to be in danger to feel fear. Okay? Fear is also part imagined, and so it can arise in the absence of something scary. In fact, because our brains are so efficient, we begin to fear a range of stimuli that are not scary. So it's conditioned fear, okay? Or not even present, okay? So it's something's not even there, it's an anxiety. There's something that triggers anxiety in us, even though that situation may not be presenting itself, okay? We get scared, and this, I think a lot of us do this a lot. We get scared because of what we imagine could happen. Isn't that true? We start thinking about, we get anxiety, and it goes up, and it builds, anxiety becomes fear because of what we think might happen, not because of the reality of what will happen. The more scared you feel, the scarier things will seem. True, right? Now pay attention to these last two. Fear dictates the actions you will take. That's a big one. Actions motivated by fear fall into four types: freeze, fight, flight, or fright. Okay? So, freeze, sheer terror. I'm froze. I can't say anything. I can't move. I've frozen, okay? Fight, of course, that's obvious, self-explanatory. I'm going to react. I'm going to throw my hands up. I'm going to, whatever it happens to be, I'm going to engage. Whatever this thing is I'm afraid of, something inside of me, even though I have fear, I'm willing to engage it, okay? Flight, okay? In other words, my choice is to run. And that's not a bad choice. You know, never bring a knife to a gunfight. You know, you pull a knife, somebody else pulls a gun, it's probably, if you can run, probably run, right? Okay? But that's an example, right? So there are times where even though you're in fear, you're not paralyzed, you can still think, And that thought process says, okay, it's time for me to run. Okay? Or fright. So, honestly, I don't know the difference between fright and freeze, but there's probably a subtle difference there. So, fright just means that you're scared of it. You can still function. That's the way I kind of take it. You can still function, but you may not make a good decision. You may not, you might be like kind of just keeping your eye on it. Maybe you're kind of moving around it. Okay, you're not running away. You're not engaging it, but at the same time, you're not frozen. So I think those are all four things that we've all experienced at one time or another. I think those are correct. The last one is, the more real the threat, the more heroic your action. Think about that. The more real the threat, the more heroic your action. And I think we see that in the news often where, whether it be an active shooter, some type of act of terrorism, it could even be just domestic violence, where somebody will step in and do something that they normally would never do. Maybe an accident on the interstate, and somebody stops and pulls somebody out of a burning vehicle or something like that. Completely out of character for who they are. But yet there's something inside of them, and it's not that they don't fear. There is fear. But that means, despite the fear that I'm going to act, I'm going to do something. And what they're saying is that the more real the threat, the greater the threat, the more heroic the action. I want you to look at Genesis chapter 22, 1 through 18. Genesis 22, 1 through 18. Verse 22, after these things God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took two of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and rose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. And then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. I want to stop right there. So, initially, I've read this story many times. It's a great story. And it's usually a story, and it's a story of faith. The faith that Abraham has, so much faith, so much so that he's willing to sacrifice his own son. Now, if you have children, I want you to think about that for a second. Would you be willing to sacrifice your child for God? Because God said so. Now, the reason I stop right here is look at what he says. It says, verse 5. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. Now, God has already told him that to offer Isaac as a burnt offering. But yet, he's telling these two men, he says, we will go and worship and we'll come back to you. Most people miss that already Abraham has faith that somehow God is going to resolve this. That sacrifice is not going to take place. There may be a sacrifice, but it won't be his son. Because he says, we'll be back. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife.
And they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." He said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they both of them went together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand, took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." He said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything for him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. And so Abraham called the name of the place, "The Lord will provide," as is said today. On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. You know, fear, like we said, fear is a healthy thing. But when you read this story, we all see the faith that Abraham had. But what was the purpose of the whole story? What was the purpose of God, or the angel actually? What was the purpose of the angel sending Abraham to sacrifice his own son? In verse 12 he says, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God." So here the scripture backs it up that fear is a healthy thing. Fear is a healthy part of Christian life. Fear of God is required. This is obvious from this story that fear of God, the angel wanted to know if Abraham feared God enough that he would sacrifice his own son. Because he knew that if he didn't, that God would have an answer for that too. And he feared that. So, if you do not have a fear of God, you're not going to be driven toward him. You will not be driven to make sacrifices that will help you to grow or to draw others to yourself or to God. So that's a key element in being a Christian, is that we fear God. And it's a healthy, respectful fear. It's not a fear of terror that freezes us, where we don't do anything, because he wants us to act. He wanted Abraham, the angel wanted to see if Abraham would take action. That even though he feared God, that he would take action and sacrifice his own son. God also tells us what is unhealthy and what is unnecessary. In 1 John chapter 4, 1 through 6, 1 John 4, 1 through 6, he says, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, for many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you heard was coming and is now in the world already. Little children, you are from God and have overcome them. For he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are from the world, therefore they speak from the world, and the world listens to them. We are from God. Whoever knows God listens to us. Whomever is not from God does not listen to us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error." He says that we need to test the spirits there that cause fear in us. The things that cause fear in us. What are they? In other words, there's going to be things that cause fear in us that are from God. And those things are good and healthy because they're going to drive us toward God. But there are other things that cause fear in us that are not from God. And we need to be able to discern which is which. And those things that are not from God, we need to turn away from. And not let those things drive us to do things that a Christian shouldn't be doing. Again from 1 John chapter 4, 16 through 18. So we have come to know and to believe the love that God has for us. God is love. And whoever abides in love abides in God. And God abides in him. By this love perfected with us, so that we may have confidence for the day of judgment. Because as he is, so also are we in the world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. So, he says that perfect love casts out fear. So one of the things that I asked you early on was fear of loneliness. A lot of people are in a relationship simply because they're afraid of being alone. They just don't want to be by themselves. But that relationship, what is it based on? Is it based on a godly love? Is it based on a perfect love that casts out fear? Or is that relationship based on fear itself, where maybe one person is telling the other person, you can't leave me. You need me. You can't live without me. You're nothing. You are incomplete without me. These are a couple of good verses here to highlight, underline, stick on your bathroom mirror when you get up in the morning, read it. You know, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Matthew 10:26. Matthew 10:26. So have no fear of them. So who's them? If you backed up a little bit, you'll see it says, behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. For nothing, and that's what he's sending them out to teach people the gospel. He's sending them out into the world. And he's saying that, have no fear. He said, but dear, I'm sending you out to wolves. He said, some people are going to persecute you. So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, nor hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light. And what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Is not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father? But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, that more value than many sparrows. So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Verse 28. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. And also right before that, 27. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light. You know, the other thing was, are you afraid of the dark? Now, of course, when we say that, we think about darkness, absence of light, right? In a dark room, dark house, dark alley, dark woods, whatever it happens to be.
But it can also mean darkness, spiritual darkness. Sometimes the places that we work, and maybe not necessarily the environment we work in, but the thing that our job takes us to places. I think about law enforcement, military. It takes us to places, dark places, where the people there are dark. And he says, do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. You see, we can have confidence that God is with us and that there is light. Wherever we're at, if we're a Christian, that there's always light, even when we're in the midst of darkness. We should fear God. He says, fear him who can destroy soul and body in hell. Now, again, fear of God is a healthy fear. It shouldn't be a fear of terror. It should be a fear that says, hey, I need to pursue this. I need to change things. I need to pursue other people. Even in the church in Smyrna, if you look in Revelations in chapter 2, 8 through 10, to the angel, to the letter written to the church in Smyrna. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write the words of the first and last who died and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich. And the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are of the synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, so I will give you the crown of life. He says, do not fear what you're about to suffer. Can you imagine receiving this letter? The other question I asked was, do you fear death? Because I think everybody does. That's very common, right? He says, do not fear what you're about to suffer. Be faithful unto death. So if you're reading this letter, and there's a group of us, like us sitting here today, and I'm reading this letter, when I get to that part of the letter, be faithful unto death, I'm looking up and I'm looking at you guys, and I'm like, I'm not the one going to die. But the fact of the matter is, it may be all of us. But he says, don't fear it. Don't fear death. Don't worry about the flesh and blood. Don't worry about the people that say they can harm body and soul. Worry about the spiritual side. Worry about the fear of God that, let's do the right thing. Always, always fight for God. Always, always. Ephesians 6, 10 through 18. This is the end of today's lesson, but the beginning of next week's lesson. This is really cool stuff because, again, we don't want to keep talking about what God says we can't do. We don't want to talk about what God says, not only what we can do, but how He can help us do it. How is it that you're telling me, don't be afraid, not to fear? Okay, well, great. Okay, you told me not to fear. You just don't tell somebody, a fireman, here's your training. Don't be afraid, run in that building. And they jump in it and run in it. There's a lot more to it, right? You have to develop confidence. And it takes training. Military, law enforcement, fire department, extensive training to make sure that you can do the things that you need to do without fear, or in the presence of fear can still do them. Ephesians 6, verse 10. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of His might.
Put on the whole armor of God.